Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk about the tariff war which Donald Trump has started. What sounded funny a few months ago, and then it was amusing that Donald Trump was threatening America's two neighbors, both Canada and Mexico. In fact, Canada is a dear partner, has been America's close ally and partner for several decades. Canada is a co-member of Five Eyes. Canada is a member of G7 with the United States, is a member of G20 with the US, is also a NATO member with the United States. So Canada has multiple alliances with the US, besides being also one of its biggest trading partners. It is now the second biggest trading partner after Mexico and above China. So who would have thought that Donald Trump would start a tariff war with its closest neighbor, both culturally, economically, strategically? And it's quite serious. It's quite intense and quite serious. The tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed are 25% across the board. I think there is some room to negotiate on the price of oil, so that he's afraid that the price of oil at the American pumps might go up and affect his own constituency. But other than that, the tariffs are there, they're imposed across the board, and they're going to have a devastating consequence for both the Canadian as well as the US economy. So I'm going to talk about that. Donald Trump has also imposed tariffs on Mexico and China. And in this conversation, I'm going to focus primarily on Canada. I will talk about Mexico and China tomorrow. But before I begin, please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. And for those of you who would like to support Khanversations, you can do so by becoming a member. And the way you become a member is by clicking the join button right next to the subscribe button. So this is what the facts are. Donald Trump has imposed 25% tariffs across the board on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China. His argument is that he wants basically three things from Mexico and Canada. He wants them to simply stop the smuggling of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, across the border, which has devastated American society for the past few years. On an annual basis, 100 to 200,000 Americans have been dying as a result of overdose or of consumption of synthetic, basically addiction to opioids, and especially use of fentanyl, which a lot of its ingredients come from China. But basically the finished product, drugs, comes into the US from across Canada as well as Mexico. Some Canadians have argued that all the people who have been arrested smuggling fentanyl are Americans. But nevertheless, the United States, at least Donald Trump, feels that Canada and Mexico are not doing enough to patrol their own border and ensure that that border does not become a gateway for drugs to the United States. There have been huge debates in the US about controlling supply side. Why not try and reduce demand for these drugs? But the US seems to be more interested in investing in cutting off supplies rather than reducing demand for these drugs. But that's a philosophical question. We will leave it for another time. So right now, fentanyl is on the table. The second issue why Donald Trump is doing this is because he wants illegal migrants to be stopped at the border. Literally millions of people have come into America undocumented from the southern border or the northern border. In fact, last year, about 97,000 people came from India. India is the third largest exporter of illegal immigrants to the United States after, I think, Mexico and Guatemala. So there are millions of people coming in. The estimate is there are now about 12 million. This is a big issue, immigration. And Donald Trump is saying that Canada and Mexico are not doing enough to basically seal their border. So essentially, he wants border control from these two countries. I don't know what he wants. He wants an assurance. Is there a daily count of how many immigrants are coming? He wants that reduced. There must be some measure that the White House staff has in their minds in the negotiations and behind the back channel dialogue that they are having with Canada and Mexico. But nevertheless, he wants these two things to stop immediately: fentanyl and illegal migrants coming across the border. So basically, he wants other countries to protect America's border. He's forgotten about his plan to build a wall, which he talked about a lot in the first term, but not anymore in the second term. The third reason why he says he's imposing this is because of the trade imbalances. And he's very upset that there's a trade deficit that the United States has been carrying with regards to Canada. And I'm going to show during the course of this conversation that that's not really a very strong argument that the trade deficit from Canada is so serious that we start a trade war. What are the implications of this? The implications are very serious, but before that, let me give you a quick view of the data. And those of you who are just listening, I think this is the time when you should try and watch this video rather than just listen, especially those who are listening to this on their cell phones. Just look at it because I'm showing you some graphs and data that I have borrowed from some other research institutions. So first of all, Canada, Mexico, and China really constitute 50% of America's trade. So it's pretty logical that Donald Trump is focusing on these three countries rather than the rest of the world. So instead of focusing on 197 other countries that the US trades with, if he can fix US deficits with these three countries, who also are the countries with whom the US has very large trade deficits. So basically, if you look at it, the imports from Canada are about $430 billion. The imports from Mexico are $480 billion, and imports from China are 448. So the biggest exporter to the US is Mexico, and then Canada, then China, then Canada, and the rest of the world exports about $2 trillion worth of goods to the US. The US exports 353 to Canada, and that's where you can see the trade imbalance, 323 to Mexico. And of course, the US has a huge imbalance of trade with China, which is close to 200 or more $1 billion. But what is also interesting is that if you look at this slide, you will see that Canada is second largest trading partner of the US. In terms of total trade, Mexico is about 700 plus, and Canada is about $700 billion. And China has dropped significantly in the past 2 years, especially since the United States decided to basically, what they're trying to do is squeeze China and reduce dependencies on China, which has made China number 3. At one point, it was the number 1 trading partner. But Canada remains the number 1 country where the US exports to. The highest number of exports of the US is over $350 billion. They go to Canada. So the US is messing with its biggest export market. If Canada responds with identical tariff rates, so if the US says 25% on Canadian goods and Canada says 25% on US goods, Canada stands to make more money than the US. That is the interesting part of it. So the US is expected to raise about $100 billion. We'll talk about that. But the US has also, in their communique with the Canadians, have warned the Canadians that if they retaliate, then this percentage of tariffs will go up. So it will go up from maybe 25 to 30 to 35% if Canada were to retaliate. So it is quite possible that the US and Canada could get caught up in a spiral, basically a downward spiral where more and more tariffs are imposed on each other's economy, basically hurting and destroying each other's economies. So one of the 3 reasons why Donald Trump is saying that he's doing this is because he's upset with the trade deficit. But of the top 10 countries which have a trade surplus with the US, Canada is the second highest or second lowest, you could say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th and 10th. Of the 10th, Canada is 9th. The biggest trade deficit that the US has is with China, which is over 30% of the trade deficit, then Mexico, then Germany, then Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Italy, then India, and then Canada. India has a bigger trade deficit or trade surplus with the US than Canada and then France. And if you look at it in terms of, this is in terms of percentages of US trade deficit. So Canada contributes less than 5% of US trade deficit. The total trade deficit that the US has is about $1 trillion. China has 32% or 33% of that share, and Canada has less than 5%. So it's not a big problem when it comes to trade deficit. But look at this in terms of sheer volume in dollars. This is the very current data. China basically has a $200 billion, $192 billion trade surplus with the US. Then Mexico is 130. And then if you go down, you see India has a $32 billion trade surplus, and Canada has only $25 billion trade surplus. This is in the US dollars, not Canadian dollars. So in fact, the US, Canada, and US, France trade is more or less quite balanced, really. And for Trump to be worried about it doesn't make sense. So what is the real problem? So what is it? Is Trump doing this for $100 billion? He can save those $100 billion by stopping the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. We sent more money than this to Israel and Ukraine in the last 1.5 years under Joe Biden. Stop supporting wars overseas. You don't need to start a tariff war with your closest neighbor. But there is, I think, more to it than just trade balance and sealing the borders. I think what he's trying to do is this is what is going to happen. Once he imposes tariffs on these imports from Canada, Canadian goods are going to become more expensive in the United States, which means that people are going to buy alternatives. And that would be an incentive for Americans to increase production at home, especially cars. Why are American car companies manufacturing cars in Canada? Is it cheaper? Probably it is, because the salaries are cheaper. The per capita income of Canada is just $54,000. We are above $80,000. So it's a relatively poor country. And so maybe the salaries and the cost of manufacturing is less in Canada. So the assumption is that either the prices of cars will go up by at least $3,000 per car, or we might start manufacturing, and if we do not just make too much profits, this could promote manufacturing in the US and create manufacturing jobs in the US. Perhaps this is the logic that he's trying to do. This is his way of improving domestic manufacturing. This is the old strategy of underdeveloped countries, which is called as import substitution strategy. You put a lot of tariffs on foreign goods, so people in your country are forced to buy domestic products, even if they are inferior. And that's what we were doing in India growing up. We were buying inferior products because foreign goods were very expensive. Because, for example, there was 300% tariffs on foreign cars when I was growing up in India. So Donald Trump is adopting the development strategies of underdeveloped countries, which have proven to be not very good, really, and not very effective. He's perhaps also trying to reduce interdependence with Canada, because the integration is quite profound in terms of manufacturing and dependence on energy, oil, gas, etc. So perhaps he wants more gas and oil to be produced in the US and less. This is going to hurt Canada definitely, because once the prices of Canadian goods in the US goes up, nobody's going to buy them. They will look for alternatives. So countries other than China and Mexico, Brazil, and India, the countries which are going to be targeted by Donald Trump, the other countries could send in stuff and export stuff to the United States and take away basically the market that Canada enjoys in the US at the moment. It's a market of close to $375 billion. But what is Canada going to do with all the surplus production if it can't export to Asia, it can't export to Europe? It's going to simply kill Canadian manufacturing. There'll be loss of jobs, and it will create a huge economic crisis. This is not smart. If Canada thinks it can go toe-to-toe with the US, no. The worst things that are being forecast at the moment in the US is that the prices of gas could go up by 75 cents per gallon. We have faced similar situations during COVID and before that. Yes, it upsets the people, and they will probably vote the next government out. Republicans may take a hit in midterm polls, and Trump is not running again, hopefully. So perhaps he doesn't care. But this is, I think, what Trump is trying to do. Is this is his way of forcing people to come and invest. So if you're a Canadian manufacturer of something technical and you have huge amounts of money invested, what you would do is move your manufacturing into the US and then sell inside the US. Already Germany, German car manufacturers have started investing in the US, fearing tariffs on Europe too. So while China may not be able to do that, China was hoping it could do that in Canada and Mexico, but other countries can move in, and so can Canada. So I think this is perhaps the long game behind this is to promote manufacturing in the United States. But I think in the short run, there will be a kind of clear inflation in the United States on special goods. See, I'm not yet looking at Mexico. There are lots of other stuff that comes from Mexico, which is consumables, daily food, strawberries, all of these things, prices are going to go up. But once the price of oil goes up, the price of everything goes up. It is the driver of inflation. And that is where this deal with Canada is going to hurt both ways. It's like a double-edged sword, which will cut both ways. Trump is banking on the fact that it will hurt Canada far more than it will hurt the United States. And he's hoping that Canada will simply buckle down before this thing goes too far. Let us see what happens. The Canadians are apparently planning a package of imposing tariffs on about $150 billion of US exports, oil, orange juice, and other stuff. We will see what happens with that. Definitely, if Canada and Mexico also up their tariffs on US goods, including China, then there will be loss of jobs immediately in the United States. The manufacturing may come and may not come, but definitely there will be loss of jobs in the short term. So this war is not beneficial to anybody. And let's see what happens. And I will continue to keep an eye on this, obviously, and talk to you. I will talk to you about the implications with Mexico, hopefully by tomorrow. I'm trying to see if I can bring some Mexican scholars to talk about it. What is also important is that by then we will know how Canada and Mexico are responding. I think there's already a lot of chatter that China has already prepared a package of tariffs that is going to impose by retaliating against the US. China's tariffs has been only 10%. It's 25% for both Mexico and Canada at the moment. So I hope you found this conversation illuminating. You got to understand some of the facts that may not be available to you in mainstream media. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.